All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Kurt Watinsky, and joining me is Renee Calloway. She's Madison, Wisconsin's pedestrian bicycle administrator. So let's zero in on complete green streets. That was just adopted, right? This
Yeah.
policy, this guide that the city is using as its guide for deciding like how to design and construct streets in the
Yeah.
future. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little about what's your definition of a complete green street?
I think, kind of the idea of complete streets has been around a little bit longer. I mean, the city of Madison has kind of had this policy and it directed staff to build complete streets, which this idea that streets are for people no matter how they travel. So, people, you should be accounting for people walking, biking, the needs of transit and driving. So, not just considering driving. That idea has been around a long time. With what we did this time, we wanted to incorporate sort of this green idea, green infrastructure. We know we need to build a more resilient, sustainable city, right? Like climate change, we've really got to think through how do we incorporate that in a way that makes sense. And one portion of that is our tree canopy. We know that having a healthy tree canopy, it has a big impact on things like heat islands. I mean, really, if you just walked or biked somewhere on a warm summer day where there were no trees and then you got to a place with trees, you like it's better, right?
Right.
Just
Big
on
difference.
that basic pleasant experience level, right? So how can we increase our tree canopy? And really our guide tries to look at what are areas of the city that have very low tree canopies and how can we increase that and how can we prioritize that in a street design. The other part is kind of green infrastructure, which is tons of differing kinds of things from permeable pavements, permeable concretes, kind of rain garden,
Mhm.
bioswale, stormwater kind of stuff. I mean, we are a city of lakes. And so when our lakes aren't healthy in the middle of the summer, it's pretty obvious to us, right? So how can we incorporate all that into our street design, but also how do we use those investments wisely, right? Like there is a kind of limited resource that we have. So how are we finding the most appropriate places where these types of infrastructure will make a difference? And so incorporating that into then how do we have a city where people can have a connected network of walking and biking. Transit is accessible for everyone in a way that our bus stops, if you're in a wheelchair, you have vision impairment, they work for you. Our buses can stay on time so that they're reliable. How does all the pieces, like this is a guide to kind of help us fit all those pieces together and make trade-offs, right? Like projects, you rarely get to build the perfect project where all the puzzle pieces come together and it's
Mhm.
simple. There's usually trade-offs to be made. And frankly, I think in the past, a lot of complete streets, we provided something for everyone. And the streets were huge and they're impossible to cross. So it's fine if you're going along them, but what happens when you need to go across them? And this is trying to bring all of that together in a thoughtful, intentional process.
Is there does the guide come up with like the ideal complete green street model? This is what we use every time, or is it like depend
Mm.
on what the situation is, the context, the I don't know,
Yeah,
density? Yeah.
that's a great question. And it isn't. We say there isn't one street design that's like every street's gonna basically look like
Yeah.
this. Yeah, there's a lot of different contexts. Is this, does this have multi-story buildings with, stores on the bottom and it's very dense? Or is it more of single family homes and there's not a lot of density? Um, or is it more like low density but higher volume of different activities? Does it have transit? It really tries to look at all of those kind of features together. And it isn't prescribing a specific design. It's saying here's a starting point, and
Okay.
here are priorities for a street of this type and context. And then here are some priorities related. Here's how to decide if transit is a priority, biking, the tree canopy, the green infrastructure, and taking all those pieces together to help someone who's working on a street design make decisions, and also to kind of help residents understand what is that process, what are we thinking about, what are we prioritizing.
Okay. So this, I would imagine this guide's pretty lengthy. I did take a look at it online. How did you tell us a little bit
Mhm.
about the process for putting
Yeah.
this together? Yeah.
Right. Well, it was a very lengthy process. It was definitely a couple of years of work. To do something like this, we actually worked with a private consulting firm
Okay.
to kind of help lead the project. We had an internal staff team. We had a city committee that was getting regular reports and providing feedback. We did a lot of different types of community engagement, from more passive, what we would call more passive engagement, like surveys, um, to open house type meetings, many of them virtual because of the time period in which we were doing this.
Oh,
And
yes.
then we really wanted to prioritize kind of bringing in input from people who are less likely to get engaged. So more low income population, a more racially diverse, people who have disabilities. And so we did some more targeted outreach, targeted surveys, some focus groups, things like that to try to really bring in that voice to the process, so that we could have, a better community understanding and really like input into what was going to be. This is very kind of an important process. Things that people don't realize is our kind of street, the right of way that belongs to the public that makes up our streets, is really the largest public space that our city has. It's more space than our city parks, even.
Oh, that's a good way to think of it. You're right. Yeah, I hadn't thought of it that way. Um, how about I want to zero in on one of the key principles that's
Yeah.
clear when you read through the documents that make up the guide is equity was
Yeah.
you wanted to incorporate equity into this guide, this Green Streets, Complete Green Streets guide. How does how is it incorporated? What does equity
Yeah.
mean in that context of, designing the
Sure.
street? Yeah.
Right. I mean, I think it can sound kind of confusing, like, what is there about equity with
Yeah.
streets, right? But I
Right.
think through our community conversations, I think it was clear that people who are low income or people of color are more likely to live on streets that are higher volume, faster, harder to cross. They don't look the same as streets that are in our kind of wealthier neighborhoods.
Mhm.
And, there are a lot of reasons for that, like a lot of historical reasons around housing,
Mhm.
and where different people could get housing and where they couldn't. So there was
Yeah.
a lot of policies in the past. And also, the city has had a lot of programs that were more resident driven. You had to know the program existed. This is like our traffic calming program, which is like speed humps, small
Mhm.
traffic circles. It was very resident driven. So you had to know you could ask for it. You had to get a petition together. You
Right.
had to get people, and these things are harder in certain neighborhoods than others. And so that changes the way streets look. So we've really been trying to be more intentional and build streets. Like if it needs traffic calming, you don't have to ask for it. Like
Mhm.
we're going to look at that with a project. We're going to look at the data on crashes, on speeds, and we're going to make those decisions. And it's not going to have to do with, did you get a petition together?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, the same would go for a student neighborhood. It would be much harder for a student to think, oh, I'm
Sure.
gonna, right, like find out what this program is.
Right.
Petition. By the time you got the petition done, you might not even live there anymore.
No.
So we're just trying to be more intentional to build streets in a more equitable fashion. So with this guide, we built in just some process steps to make sure that we're particularly in areas that we know have inequities, that we're slowing down and we're really looking at our designs and we're tracking that information. That also we're really making sure, because some of these neighborhoods too might have more turnover, they might be more renters, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And so like just really trying to make sure we're staying on top of feedback we've gotten in the past in those neighborhoods, and just being intentional about trying to build the best possible street everywhere.
Sure. So I saw a reference, and I didn't read into the deep,
Yeah,
all the way down to the weeds, but I saw, I think it was called an equity priority area or something. So
yeah,
maybe you map some of these neighborhoods where you'll be
yeah.
more intentional with your process. Is that kind of the
Yeah,
concept?
so we identified some original ones, and they're neighborhoods where the city is already kind of trying to do more coordination work to lift up issues. So
Hmm.
those are where we're starting, but really trying to look at kind of, having a process that we can add more areas in the future as we look
Sure.
at changing demographics within the city, and which areas would we want to be just slowing down, making sure we're really following some very particular steps to bring in that input and documenting it so that we can also in the future kind of look at projects in all kinds of neighborhoods and ensure that, this is working, right? Like we're getting the outcomes we desire.
Right, right. Well, Renee, I really appreciate you taking the
Yeah.
time to speak with me this morning. And this will be posted on the students, a place where students can go and learn a little bit more about complete green streets. And I appreciate you taking the time.